Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, my guest is White House correspondent Simon Ateba from Today News Africa. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to have you on because even though I've worked in conservative politics for quite a while, I rarely hear anything new. And when I saw your segment on Tucker Carlson about being a reporter in the Biden White House, I found this really interesting. So just to start off, what has been your general experience covering the Biden White House as a White House correspondent for Africa?
Yeah, so it's been a real nightmare, right? It's been really hard. The level of discrimination has been really deep. As an African correspondent at the White House, it's been really hard to have a question, to get a question. It's not just me. I have my colleagues who also are from Africa, a few of us who are there, and we don't really get to be called on. I've spent the last 3 months trying to ask a question on the US-Africa Summit. And so the discrimination is so deep that even when the president is receiving 50 African leaders for the US-Africa Summit beginning tomorrow, we are not even given the opportunity to ask questions. That's how bad it is. That's how deep the discrimination has been covering the Biden White House, especially under the new press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Was this going on under the previous press secretary, Jen Psaki, as well?
Yes, we've had many clashes. I think it's something fundamental, right? People categorize Africans, at least in the White House, as people who are not equal to the other correspondents, right? So giving you a question is a favor, even when they are they just unveiled the US-Africa policy in August, trying to strengthen ties between the US and Africa. And this is happening as China and Russia are expanding in Africa. And the US is lagging far behind, and they are trying to play catch up. And so when you don't give a question to the person who represents that continent, it says a lot about how you see that continent, how you view that continent, and how you intend to interact with that continent.
And do you think that this could be stemming from the fact that the White House is against foreign media, or are they against specifically media from Africa?
Yeah, I think it's mainly Africa, right? At the press briefing on Friday, on Thursday, you know, the 2 questions from Pakistan, from India. I have nothing against them. Like, I have friends who come from everywhere. I love all people. And I love all genders, all men, women, anything you want to be. I don't discriminate against anyone. But at the White House, even when the president is receiving 50 African heads of leaders, 49 head of state and head of government, and the chairperson of the African Union, she won't even give a question to someone who covers that continent. Just to show you how deep it is, she will take multiple questions from Pakistan, from India, from Russia, from Ukraine, from everywhere, except from the continent where your president is about to host the biggest gathering of leaders of perhaps his entire presidency. So it's more of African to see us as less, the see us as not being equal. And it's not really about me, right? It's the perception, it's deep, it's ingrained in their brains that these are the people we don't really consider as being equal. So giving them a question is a favor, right? So even when we preach that we're actually trying to, you know, strengthen ties and strengthen relations with Africa, we don't demonstrate it right inside the White House, right inside the briefing room.
And in terms of Biden White House officials, aside from the 2 press secretaries who've been at that podium, has that been prevalent amongst them as well? Has your organization, African Media, been shut out of asking other people at the podium from the Biden administration questions?
Yes, same thing. It's so deep that so there's this thing called the White House National Security Council. So you have the White House, and then you have the White House National Security Council. The Security Council is almost like the brain power of the White House. So we do analysis, and they do every day, they do what is called background calls. And so even when they do those background calls on Africa, they don't call on African journalists. That's how bad it is. And it's not just the White House National Security Council. Even the people who work in the communication department, they've shut doors on us. They've shut doors on me, like going to them to request information for something that concerns Africa, for something that they themselves are preaching. And you realize that they shut the door. And I say literally shutting the door on you. And so it's been, I think it's deep, is a psychological damage that's been so deep that having a summit to strengthen ties with Africa, it's almost like hypocrisy, right? It's almost like it's the biggest deceit that you can ever have, because if you respect people, if you really want to build relationship with a continent, you will give at least one question to the person who covers that continent when you are receiving 50 African leaders from that continent.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, and so not doing that shows how deep, you know, the level of disdain, contempt, and discrimination really is.
So you're saying even outside of the press briefing room, ways of getting information, access to having follow-up questions, all of that is being suppressed. This is not just the two press secretaries who've been doing this.
Yes, it's not just the Karine Jean-Pierre or Jen Psaki, the two press secretaries under Biden. I'm saying that other officials in the Biden White House have shut doors on me. Right. And I'm saying that the White House National Security Council, when they do press briefing, it's usually phone calls, right? When they do press briefing on Africa, they don't call on African journalists, and they don't call on me, even when I'm on the call, even when other journalists from Africa are on the call. No, just to show you, like, you know, people come online who don't know Jack. They come online, they tweet. They don't know anything. They don't know the steps that you've taken, the emails that you've written, the attempts to talk to them, go into the lower press and say, hey, you know, you don't call on us. Let's talk. Let's have a meeting. Is there anything that we need to do? Do we need to dress differently? Do we need to look differently? Do we need to have a different approach? And so you realize that they won't reply emails that you send them for questions. They won't give you questions during press briefings at the White House. They won't give you questions off press briefing. And so you find yourself in a dilemma, right? And so you yell out your question, you are seen as a bad person, because that's what people are watching on TV. They don't know that you, before yelling out a question, you've approached them, you've written, you've gone there, you've attended countless press briefing at the White House National Security Council where you are not called on. So it's a psychological damage that has been so deep that I don't know how to correct it. And I always say that it breaks my heart when people with not enough information come on Twitter and they just say, oh, no, you're disruptive. We saw you on TV. You didn't allow her to ask you to answer your question. But she's not even allowing you to ask the question. She's not calling on you. And so when she's taking the last question of the briefing on Thursday last week, and I'm like, oh my God, 3 months, she's not called on us. And she's taking the last question of this particular press briefing. And the summit is starting on Tuesday, almost on Monday, because you know everything's set from today. And she's not called on us for 3 months. When will I ever get a question? And so you try to ask a question, and people watch it on TV, and they're like, "Oh my God, this guy is so disruptive." And then she shut the press briefing, and people are like, "Oh my God, she just shut the press briefing." Actually, she's finished the press briefing.
And so, so basically, you're saying that you've even tried to change to suit the Biden White House. You've asked if there are things that you need to work on as a reporter. You've asked if your style needs to be changed. Has the Biden White House at all responded in terms of your accusations? Because you're right, it does look like you're just going out and being angry and being upset, but there's been this slow escalation over this amount of time. So has the Biden White House tried to make amends with you? Have they tried to open up communication between African media and themselves? What's been going on there?
No, they're not doing much, because the level of disdain and contempt, it's almost like racism, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's hard to say racism because she's black, I'm black, she's an immigrant, I'm an immigrant.
Mhm.
And so she's discriminating against me more than Jen Psaki. Jen Psaki was bad. She was horrible. She
Mhm.
discriminated against me all the time. When I went on Tucker Carlson's show, she almost didn't call on me for months, and I had to get back on the show. And so what people see on TV, it's the culmination
I see.
of many, of countless attempts to get our questions answered.
I see.
Yeah, so let me say this. When you saw me on the show, when you see me on your show, do I look like, or do I sound like someone, a fool, who goes to the White House and say, I came to yell out questions today, I'm a
Right.
fool, I'm dumb? No, you don't do that. What you do is you raise your hand, you wait for your turn. You raise your hand, you wait for your turn.
Right.
And so you go there the first day, the second day, 1 month, no question. 2 months, no question. 3 months, no question. Then you try to talk to them. You send emails. You attend press briefing, background calls, and still all the doors are shut, and you are left with,
Right.
I
It's
need to,
frustration.
yeah.
And have other journalists in the White House press briefing room, or even amongst your colleagues, have they pointed this out to you as well, this bias? Has there been a discussion of it?
Yes, so most people who are from the right, like, she won't call on the Daily Caller.
Mhm.
She rarely calls on the New York Post. She calls on the New York Post maybe on Friday for the
Mhm.
first time, maybe after a month. She rarely calls on she has never called on the Washington Times. She rarely calls on Al Jazeera. She rarely calls all the newspapers who are considered to be on the right, like
Mhm.
right-leaning publication. She rarely calls on them. She doesn't give many of them access to the president press briefing. Oh, that's something that I forgot. Even when President Biden is doing press briefings, African journalists are not credentialed to attend. I have been credentialed only once, and I've
Wow.
been the only African journalist who has received a credential to attend any of President Biden's press briefings. And he has had more than 20 press briefings. We fill the form and we receive an answer that no, due to space they give you, due to space, you are not allowed to be there. So it's deep. You don't get questioned during the press briefing. You don't get access when President Biden is doing his own press briefings. You don't get responses from your emails to them. You don't get called on during White House National Security Council. So all the doors are blocked and
Mhm.
nothing is being done.
And I want to know, just sort of in closing, because you have this summit coming up with 50 African leaders. Do you think part of this sort of suppressing of access by the Biden administration for African media to the Biden administration, could it be in fact because they don't want information about how they're treating Africa to come out? Because Biden is meant to have this summit with all these leaders, and he's not meant to meet with any of them one-on-one. Is it the kind of situation where the Biden administration doesn't want the general public or Africa's news agencies or Africa's readers to know about the lack of attention Biden is giving Africa? Is there something along that line you think that could be going on?
Yes, I think it has to do with that, right? You know, and those are the questions I wanted to ask her on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
you make these 50 African leaders, there are 49 African heads of state, plus the chairperson of the African Union. So in all, there are 50 African leaders who fly to DC. And they fly to DC, they spend a lot of money. I don't know if you know this, Four Seasons Hotel in DC costs $22,000 a night for the presidential suite. So yeah, 22,000. Think about that, 22,000 for 24 hours. And so it doesn't, and you're not the only one. The president comes with people, protocol, Secret Service, all kinds of people. And so they come to DC and they spend a lot of money.
Right.
And the president doesn't have the time to even meet with them for 5 minutes, one-on-one. The president just came back from Asia for the US as it's a summit with Asian countries. He sat down with many of them one-on-one. I was covering it from DC. And so I think the reason she doesn't take questions from us is two things. First, the attention is not there. And so when she sit down with her expert before the briefing, they don't have much on Africa. Second, we don't send her questions in advance to give us answer because we don't always know the question that we ask. It depends on what's going on between US-Africa relations. And yeah, and today News Africa focuses solely on US-Africa relations. And I want to say something before you close because we may not have time. How will you explain that the newspaper, Today News Africa, that focuses on US-Africa relations, is being almost banned from asking questions at the White House when China and Russia are spreading misinformation against the US in Africa? I don't know if it makes sense. So I will say to everyone watching today to keep being there for us, understand that I'm not a fool and we are not dumb to go to the White House and shout or yell out questions. If you hear us yell out the question, is frustration because we've exhausted all effort. And the best way to support us is just to go to todaynewsafrica.com and subscribe or contribute to our publication. We have no money, no palace, no jet, nothing. And we just have the will to understand that instead of allowing China and Russia spread misinformation against the US in Africa, building roads, bridges, while the US is sleeping, you need to back up the person who is trying to improve that relationship with accurate, relevant information.
Yeah. And I thank you for coming on. Hopefully the Biden administration will start to right this wrong against bias against African journalists covering relations between Africa and the US, and specifically try to fix the idea that perhaps the Biden administration itself does not want accurate information about the relations between the US and Africa to go out to African readers and US readers. Thank you for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up with your reporting as a White House correspondent?
Yeah, so the first thing they need to go to todaynewsafrica.com, and then they need to go we are very active on Twitter at Today News Africa or at Simon Ateba.
Yeah.
Simon, SIMON, Ateba, ATEBA.
Great. And we'll link all that below. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.